an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live, which is also listed in your program. You can also follow us on Instagram at JFK Junior Forum. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming tonight's guests, Peter Baker, Barbara Comstock, Michael Zeldin, Lynn Sweet, and Institute of Politics Senior Fellow Dan Balls.
It's my delight to be able to welcome all of you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum and the Institute of Politics. This forum has been the site of many engaging and stimulating conversations, and I expect tonight will live up to that very much. We've got a wonderful group here. It's a special gathering of people because it's a gathering of fellows. Lynn Sweet was a fellow a few years ago. Barbara and Michael are fellows today. I was a fellow a year and a half ago and am now back here as a part-time fellow. And Peter will be a fellow whenever he wants to be here.
Future fellow.
It's a great panel. Lynn is one of the great interrogators of politicians in Washington. Peter is one of my most admired colleagues. I have incredible respect for Peter. You all have been able to see Barbara and Michael in action throughout this year, this semester, at their study groups and in other settings, so you know the quality of their work. So without further ado, I want to just again say thank you all for being here and turn it over to Lynn.
All right, thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's great to be back at the forum. And we have experts with us today, so I'm going to jump in and just start with the news of the day, which is that the House Judiciary Committee in Washington did vote to authorize subpoenas to obtain Mueller's full report, and then they also wanted to have Hope Hicks and Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, Ann Donaldson, and Don McGahn, who was a White House counsel. They issued subpoenas to them. But we're going to focus on Mueller, and as this session is billed, looking ahead. So one of the things I want to start out with Barbara, I met her when she was an investigator for the Republican-controlled Government Reform Committee investigating Bill Clinton. And there were numerous investigations going on back in the day. But what's wonderful about Barbara, and why I'm going to give the first question to her about these subpoenas, is that she has seen the congressional process inside and out. Inside as a top staffer, as an attorney, and as a member of Congress who observes and does things, but they are not the whole story when it comes to what a committee does. So Barbara, right now the authorization came today. We don't know if these subpoenas will ever be issued for the Mueller report. We know that the Attorney General said he'll do a redacted report by mid-April. And we could, if we have time, go on to what are the, looking ahead to what the redactions are. But we're going to hold that complicated thought in a minute. My question to you is, Jerry Nadler, the committee chair, said, well, if we don't get it, then it's going to be up to a judge. Can you pick up what you think will happen, and then is it really going to be up to a judge, or are there some other things that a congressional subpoena or a committee can do?
Okay, well, thank you. In addition to being chief counsel on that government reform committee, I also served at the Justice Department. So what you have here are institutional battles. The Justice Department, when I served there, we had to put the Justice Department's interests first and look at things there. That's what both Mueller, Rosenstein, and Attorney General Barr are doing right now. But Congress has its right to investigate, which is very thorough. So when I served in that role as a staffer, when I was in Congress, I didn't serve on any of these committees, so I was actually passing legislation and doing work for my constituents then, so not working on these issues. But so it's an institutional clash, And Congress is going to push, they voted unanimously that the whole report should be out, but then the Justice Department is going to say, no, we have 6E, which is grand jury information, we have national security issues, and then we might have some privacy concerns. Interestingly, if you go back and read one of Peter's books during the Clinton years, you would see that the roles were reversed. Jerry Nadler didn't want to turn over any of these things, very strong statements about why this would be wrong, and then you would see the Republicans saying, yes, they should be turned over. So the roles are reversed now. I imagine what will now happen is there will be a dance. It'll go. I do think Bill Barr is an institutionalist, so he is going to protect the Justice Department, but also he has made it very clear he wants to put as much out there. He is working with Rod Rosenstein, kept him on. He is also working closely with Mueller. So I do think there is going to be kind of everything that they can put out there. And then probably Nadler and Congress will come back and say, well, let's go to the court and see if we can get a little bit more of this grand jury information. But it's important to point out when you get whatever version of the report you get and you start reading it, Congress might find out, since they have been subpoenaing and talking to many of the same people, that they have a lot of this information already. I expect what's going to be in that 400-page report is a lot of what we already know. But if there's there's too many redactions, then the dance will start and they'll go back and forth. You have a number of different contempt citations you can be.
Is this before they go to a judge?
Yes, this is because if they're going to hold them in contempt, there's actually a contempt that's never been used since 1935, where they can actually physically say, we're going to bring you up here, try you at the bar in Congress, and then if you don't hand it over, we're keeping you here. And you can't go anywhere.
Hold that thought for a moment. So, Peter, do you think the next story is just the process of the back and forth of what it will take to get the Mueller report out? What's the journalistic play here?
I mean, it depends on how much Bill Barr really wants to have that fight. I mean, if he has said he wants to be as transparent as possible, and it's possible he gives us this 400-page report and they've blacked out Social Security numbers and they've blacked out a few things that people would more or less agree on. It's also possible that they could negotiate something, right? Okay, you didn't give us everything, you redacted this, can we have something in camera, in secret? Can we go over these, the things you didn't give us in public behind closed doors? Would that satisfy them? It's very possible it wouldn't. I mean, it's a very polarized moment.
Or it might be some of the national security things they'd have to read behind closed doors, but maybe they let them.
But those are little boutique slices. Yeah. But journalistically, though, is that the best available story right now that you think? Yeah.
I still want to know what's in the report. I think Barbara's right that we'll probably know a lot of it because we have been reporting on it. But it can't be that he spent 2 years investigating this with the power of subpoenas and as tightly held leak-proof operation as they have been. And there aren't things that we don't know in there. At least I assume that's the case. And I want to know what that is. I also want to know, as a reporter, how he comes to the conclusions that Bill Barr attributes to him. Now, Bill Barr has given us 2 sentence fragments, so we've got to be careful about saying we know too much.
73 words.
73 words. The bottom line that Bill Barr reports is that Mueller says, I have established no conspiracy with Russia, and I basically don't take a position on obstruction. I can't exonerate, but I'm not accusing either. We'd like to know, how do you get to those conclusions?
So Michael wrote a column that's on CNN.com where he said that Barr should just have done nothing. He would have been better off. So do you think that the Mueller's purpose would have just been served better by Barr doing nothing for a little bit of time, at some time? Where is that line drawn where Barr would have to do something at least?
Well, so the regulations that govern Barr's activity were drafted in the aftermath of the salacious Ken Starr report in the Clinton impeachment. In the aftermath of that report, they drafted new regulations to essentially prevent the public from receiving the report of the independent counsel. I think it was a terrible mistake, but that was the response that the Starr report generated. So now we find ourselves in this situation where, under the regulations, the Attorney General is to receive from the special counsel a confidential report, and the Attorney General's obligation is to notify Congress that that report was received and whether or not the special counsel was denied any investigative leads that he wanted to follow. So on March the 22nd, that's what Barr did. He sent a notification to Congress that the report was in, the investigation was over, and that they denied Mueller nothing. The regulations then allow Barr to make some sort of distributions of the report if it's in the public interest and consistent with Justice Department policy and legal precedent. That's what I think he should have done next. Instead, he took this interim step, which was to summarize in 73 words Bob Mueller's 400 plus page report, and then make ultimate conclusions himself. I think that in the piece I wrote, I said that I see nothing in the regulations that authorize Barr to make the decision that Mueller didn't make. Remember, Mueller in Barr's summary of Mueller, he said that Mueller did not reach a conclusion about whether there was obstruction of justice. He said it was a close legal and factual call, and that he didn't have sufficient evidence to make that determination, that he was passing it forward in that respect. I think the pass forward was to Congress for them to evaluate under their standard of impeachability, but as that ball was being passed to Congress, Barr intercepted and said, well, Mueller, if you're not going to make a decision, I'm going to make it for you. I think that was the problem.
That's with Rosenstein. It's important. And he didn't have to keep Rosenstein on, and he
could have done it with every single person in the Justice Department. The point is that you have a special counsel who is to make decisions like this independent of the Justice Department, and it's not to be for the Justice Department to superimpose their decisions over Mueller's decision. That, I think, is not what the special counsel regulations were designed for. That's what I think Barr got wrong.
So you have worked and know Mueller. Barbara knows and has worked with Barr and Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General.
And Mueller was FBI Director.
So we're talking today with people that actually, these are living, breathing human beings to them. So maybe first Mike and then Barb, how could the special counsel Mueller not see that by not being he may have been explicit someplace else in the report. I'm not making the call, but I hope Congress does. Maybe it's there, but Barr, and he would not have messed around if it was that explicit. How could, as we're talking about what's ahead, how could these three men not have seen the confusion that it would cause by moving the way they did? No matter what you think of Trump and Mueller and the essential findings, it's more chaos to an already chaotic
environment. Well, I think most of the report will be out by mid-April, and people are going to take yes for an answer. And as we've seen already from the polls, probably when you see the report and read more, a lot of people still are going to have the same view that they had before the report.
They would.
Because when they asked people before the report came out, is it going to change your mind? Not surprisingly, on each side, they said no. And you have seen a lot of this in real time, a lot of the information, and now there will be more detail there, and that's what will be interesting but I think you may not have that much of a different view of things but I am confident that most of the information will be out, and they've all made that commitment to date.
Would you think, from what you know of Mueller, that he might, if he were with us today, feel a little betrayed or jammed by what Barr did?
Well, it's hard to know that. I personally would expect that Mueller would have been surprised by Barr intervening and making a decision about something which he said the facts were too close as a legal and factual matter for him to resolve. So because he was appointed by the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General in this case, because he was appointed to resolve that, because the Justice Department was perceived to have a conflict, it's hard to understand how Mueller would expect the Justice Department would make that decision, because that's why they aren't involved in this case day to day. So yeah, I think it probably was a surprise, but maybe it is the sort of thing where when you don't make a decision about indictability or not indictability, you invite that. I just think that...
I think that was a surprise itself.
Well, maybe.
Because usually you would make a decision one way or the other in a normal case and say we declined to prosecute, or if they thought we could prosecute but we don't think we can because it's the president, they would have detailed that. So the real surprise is that no decision was made.
Right. So I have a theory. It's a theory. And that theory is that Mueller wanted very much to interview the president, and that the Justice Department resisted that subpoena, and that he stood down. And he didn't trigger the report to Congress that he was denied, but rather he stood down. In the absence of the evidence that he would have gained from that oral testimony of the president is what caused him to hesitate to make the ultimate decision. I don't know, Peter, do you have a sense of that?
Well, okay, and
that's a perfectly plausible theory to me. The other theory I would throw out there on top of that, and we talked about it for anybody who heard the earlier class, is I think that there is a really interesting constitutional question as to whether, in this particular case, on the question of obstruction, the things that people have, the actions that President Trump has taken for the most part that have led people to accuse him of obstruction are largely things in which he's exercised the use of his Article 2 power in the Constitution, okay? So the debate is, can you charge a president with obstruction or accuse a president of obstruction for using the power he's entitled to use? Now, his critics would say, yes, you can corruptly use power even if it would be perfectly legitimate in other circumstances. His defenders, the Rudy Giuliani team and so forth, are making the argument that no, in fact, you can't question the president's motives for using his power, otherwise you've completely altered the shape of our constitutional theory of executive autonomy. And it may be that Robert Mueller, as a subsidiary officer of the Justice Department, chose to say that's not my call to make, and I'm going to leave it to somebody else. I don't know the answer to that.
One other thing that can come out, where could be in there, is whether or not Mueller thinks he has an obligation to explain why he did not bring charges against people he investigated. So, Peter, when you were on MSNBC the other night, you said, well, this isn't all sunshine for Trump, despite what he's saying, because there's a lot of things that a president could be accountable for that aren't criminal acts. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that the congressional committees are trying to do is just get the whole story together of what happened and who did what. Mueller was looking for criminal acts. Right. Now, if he does explain why he didn't bring charges, that helps it. But as a journalist, is that a story that you think is gettable? Will it be months in the doing if we don't really get the report, or does it dependent on the report? Will the congressional investigations, you think, yield the whole story? Now, what will it take to figure this out?
That's a good question. I think that I kind of agree with Barbara. I think we're going to see the report. I think they're going to fight about aspects of it. But my guess is that by the end of the day, whether because Bill Barr just puts it out there or because they litigate it in some fashion, we're going to basically know, basically what Robert Mueller thought about this. Are there going to be some things that don't come out? Maybe, but it just feels to me that the weight of this is just on the side of transparency. And then people are going to judge. They're going to judge, okay, this is not a crime, but is this what we think is okay for a candidate for presidency to do or a sitting president to do? And those are completely legitimate debates to have. Ronald Reagan was never charged with a crime in Iran-Contra, but we could say we didn't think what he did was the right thing to do.
Or we could find out there were contacts dealing with WikiLeaks. They didn't rise to the level of anyone getting charged, but they weren't great.
Right. Now,
but you do have like Adam Schiff saying he saw criminal things, which clearly the lawyer tasked with this Mueller has said is not the case.
Right.
So
we getting over
a lot
his,
of
and one of the things will be interesting to know,
hyperventilations are already wrong.
And one of the things that could be interesting to know, though, is if we're able to find out, and the report might not say this, is whether there was a debate in the office on any of these conclusions, right? Did some of the prosecutors
that's what we may be able to hear from from Mueller himself.
Exactly.
From Barr.
And some prosecutors say, we think this was a crime. Other ones said, no, we don't. And they had it out and they debated. They did that with Hillary Clinton and the email case, right? This is recently
then it's the court of public opinion.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there is in any investigation, it would not be surprising that some investigators think, yeah, I think there's a crime here, and others think, no, there's not, and they ultimately decide not to because they do have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's, it would not be surprising.
Although indicting a Republican in D.C. is not as hard as a Democrat.
Of course,
right.
There is
but could I may I just add something to this, which is that, and I agree with Peter's last point, which is there may well have been a give and take over this. And the reason why...
Particularly on obstruction, right? Because there seems to be this
particularly
middle
on
ground.
obstruction, but maybe on collusion, because there were acts that could be a conspiracy, which could violate federal election law, but which they chose not to bring as criminal charges, but found to be wrong. But on obstruction, we've been talking about the report, whether the public will see the report. Were I a Congress person, and that'll never happen, if I were a Congress person, the reason I'd want to see the underlying information, not just the report, is that I want to see the letter exchanges between Trump's lawyers and Mueller's lawyers, between Mueller and the Justice Department. I want to see how they thought through these issues, because Mueller's report says, according to Barr, that these were difficult legal and factual issues which do not exonerate the president.
Right.
That means that there was ongoing... On obstruction, that's what we're talking about. On obstruction, that do not exonerate the president, which means that there was active debate.
Would that be privileged communication?
Well, the president has said in public, according to Barr, that he will not assert executive privilege, and therefore it will be released. I'll believe it when I see it, but that's
right,
what
because
that's what
Trump
he said.
also said he wanted the report released, and then he said he didn't.
Well, I understand that, but well, the small point I'm making is not whether we can take the president at his word on this, but rather, if you want to understand the full story, why it was that decisions were made, you really need to see the communications among the parties to understand the rationale. If, in fact, my theory is right, that Mueller did want to interview the president, but for reasons not yet known, he stood down from it without triggering the report to Congress. We need to see that.
Would you expect that to be in any of the, would you expect that to be in the Mueller report? We know that the request has been made in the subpoena for underlying documents. Does that count as an underlying document, which often people, I would take to be grand jury testimony, but maybe not other communications like you're talking about?
There are more attorney-client privilege implicating documents than they are than they are anything else, and we'll have to see whether they let them go.
So, Barbara, as a staffer who's been there investigating the Clintons and now seeing the situation here, if the Democrats if they see months of litigation or negotiation ahead in getting the report, can they, in a sense, just recreate a lot of what Mueller did themselves? Can you talk about that?
Can they do what?
Can they recreate themselves some of this?
Yes,
Tell us a little bit.
Congress has a very broad role in investigating, and so if they decide, it's really going to have to be a political decision if they want to spend the time to do that. They can get deposition authority, and they have been deposing some of these witnesses already, so they could bring people in and maybe follow up and say, well, gee, I would have asked this question, he didn't, so they can go through that. And the depositions, both Democrats and Republican counsel sit in on that. It's private, but then they can release it. You can have hearings. So there's a lot that Congress can still do, and they can subpoena a lot of this material, but then they have to decide how far they want to go when, at the end of the day, if we already know what's there,
right.
in large part, do they want to spend that time and effort? But I think once the report's out and we see the detail that's there and what the thought process was, maybe Mueller will be up, Barr. I'm sure you're going to see most of the people in front of Congress and in front of these various committees. The committees will probably fight over who can get them first and things like that. But I do think, despite what you're trying, there's this drama that's being created right now, and people are going to have to take yes for an answer because they're going to see most of this and know most of it. And then, like I said, I don't think that many minds are going to be changed, unfortunately, but, it would be interesting to see the facts.
Well, I think it's also important. It's not so much will minds be changed or take.
But
yes.
The public has a right to know.
No, I understand that, but or take yes for an answer. I'm not sure that I understand that exactly, but rather, I think it's important. Say on the matter of the so-called collusion thing. There were scores and scores of communications between Trump orbit people and Russians. It would be interesting to know, and hopefully the report expands upon this, why? What was going on that gave rise to all these communications, and why was there so much lying about those communications? And so there's a lot to be understood, even if there isn't criminality charged at the end of the day, because we're gonna be rolling into an election in 2020, and you want to understand sort of the moral compass of the people who you're going to be asked to vote for.
So, for the lawyers here, quick answer. In the fight over the release of the Mueller report, do you think it will end up before the Supreme Court?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it depends on how it plays out at the interim stages. I don't see how it exactly gets to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure what the issues are. So I would think at this point we've got a long, long way to go before it's...
I don't think it will, because I think both in the Bush administration, definitely in the Obama administration, if I'm mistaken, there was contempt when people didn't turn over documents. Then the criminal contempt report went over to the Justice Department, and in the case of the Obama administration, they refused to prosecute it. And then it's like back in your court politically, and the court's like, this is a political matter. So I think it will play out more politically. And that'll be also if they're subpoenaing people. I think many of these witnesses will probably just say, as has also happened in the past 2 administrations on a bipartisan basis, people will take the Fifth and say, I already talked to the special prosecutor, I'm not going to play, I don't feel like spending more money on lawyers, I'm taking the Fifth, I'm only coming in if you give me immunity. So I think you'll see some of that too, perhaps, with these recent subpoenas today.
Well, that's interesting. So, Pete, one of the reasons Peter is one of the outstanding journalists is he has the ability to put out a conceptual scoop as well as scoops of fact and things that are happening. And you on March 26th wrote about...
A conceptual scoop is when you don't actually have any information.
But you have, or you
but you dress it up a lot.
No, but here's the thing, and they're hard to come by. When you see what everybody else sees, but you see something somebody didn't see within that, that splendid bit of facts that came out each day. And you said that Mueller's investigation erases the line drawn after Watergate, and that Trump has thrown out the rules, and the decision to not take a position if Trump was shattering the norms of interventions, if he did obstruct justice, means that future presidents will quote, feel entitled to similar actions. And that is an exquisite conceptual scoop. Since you have done scandals and White House coverage for years, one of the most experienced in the business, could you tell us a little bit about the challenges of covering the Mueller report as it has evolved in its various stages, from your perch in the White House, and then as part of one of the biggest teams working on this story?
I mean, the great thing is I have such amazing colleagues who are really more immersed in Mueller than I am, and they know the world of that a lot more. And so when you say conceptual scoops, my job is to kind of step back from the nitty-gritty of, what this prosecution proved in this particular trial, or what this search warrant might be after, and to try to look at it in a larger 30,000-foot level, like Dan Balls does, like you've done. What does this mean for the presidency? What does this mean for Washington? What does this mean for our future? And the one you mentioned, I thought that's important, because what we've seen Trump do, forget whatever Mueller has to report, we've seen out in front of us a lot of actions that Trump has taken that other presidents wouldn't take, right?
Yes.
I mean,
it was done by the staff. They were the Clinton administration. That was all staff.
Well, there's something to that. It's not quite the same, but you're right. I mean, but Clinton would never have thought, much as he wanted to, of firing Louis Freeh. He would have liked to. He hated Louis Freeh. Louis Freeh didn't like him either. But he wouldn't have done it, because he would have seen that. He would have seen a political cost probably as much as anything else.
He wouldn't have tweeted.
What's that?
He wouldn't have tweeted.
He wouldn't have tweeted. I mean, look, Clinton left it to the staff and the James Carvilles of the world to go after Starr and to make, to try to delegitimize the investigation against him, and Trump does it himself quite vigorously. And But Trump just says things out loud that other politicians probably think but would never admit. Like, he says, I'm not happy with this attorney general. I'm going to fire him because he didn't protect me in this Russia investigation. He didn't actually even bother to come up with a face-saving kind of reason. I'm firing him because I don't think his marijuana investigations are very good, or I don't like his policies on criminal sentencing. He just flatly said he recused himself and therefore he wasn't able to protect me from this investigation, and therefore I'm firing him. Wow, right? I mean, so what's really interesting then is to analyze, what does that mean going forward? Does that mean things that other presidents wouldn't have done are now thinkable in a way that they hadn't been thinkable before? And if what we see with the various actions President Trump has taken do not result in any form of accountability or sanction or judgment that says these are wrong, then the natural conclusion is that the next successor presidents may or may not feel like, well, I could do the same thing because it didn't actually result in any negative action. And it doesn't mean they will. Other presidents will come in and still see things as being improper or beyond a line they don't want to cross, even if they could. But there is a consequence each time we have one of these impeachment kind of things, because it rewrites the rules for the next one. And just like the Clinton impeachment rewrote the rules going forward, this one is rewriting the rules for his successors.
So speaking of the rules, you did, Mike, talk about in your article that you thought there was a need to maybe change some of the special counsel rules. What are the changes that you think need to be made based on your observations of what has happened so far and the bit of a mess we seem to be in, at least in this period before we get the report, if we get it? I'd
scrap them. I don't think they need to be changed. I think they need to be removed.
All
the
There's
current,
no special counsel allowed?
No. I'm trying to get there.
Okay.
The current. So we had an independent counsel statute, which was long and complicated and provided for a lot of things: congressional oversight, release of reports publicly, payment of witnesses who were deemed to be subjects and not charged, the right of individuals who were named in the report to review the report and comment on the report and have those comments included within the report. There were lots of things in the independent counsel statute that when the Congress let it lapse on June 30th, 1999, and in its place put these special counsel regulations, those special counsel regulations denied the public the right to a report, the Congress the right to the report and the grand jury material, the right for congressional oversight. And I just think that we would be much better off going back to an independent counsel statute that provides broader protections for the integrity of the investigation and for those who are being investigated. So that's why I would say the current special counsel regulations, which were written in good faith, which were an attempt to respond to what was thought to be the over-the-top Starr report, it's time to revisit and revamp, and I would say start all over, looking at the last independent counsel statute as a better template.
So
I was going to say the reason why we don't have an independent counsel statute today is a kind of a bipartisan consensus, because both parties actually felt that they were burned by it one way or the other. A lot of people here are too young to remember, but Larry Walsh, who was the Iran-Contra, and I'm writing a book that involves some of this stuff, so that's why it's sort of on my head. The Larry Walsh, the Iran-Contra independent counsel, issued a new indictment of Caspar Weinberger 4 days before the 1992 election, which the Bush people would to this day say, killed them in a moment where they were kind of building some momentum back. Whether it did or not, it was seen by Republicans as a very unfair partisan thing to do. Bush then responds by pardoning Caspar Weinberger after the election. So Republicans hated the independent counsel statute from that experience. Democrats hated it from the Ken Starr experience, where they felt he was partisan, he was out to, so both sides had no problem letting the statute go. And the problem is that there isn't really a good substitute, right? And nobody's figured out a clean method of holding presidents accountable that is not subject to partisan or political interference, and yet is not so independent that it gets out of control. And that's the
congressional oversight is part of that. And at the end of the day, that was the decision when bipartisanly they let it lapse, have it be taken care of within the Justice Department, and then Congress can also aggressively investigate, which you now have investigations going on in a Republican-controlled Senate and a Democrat-controlled House, and both of them can move forward. I think the Senate investigation, Mark Warner and Senator Barr have been worked pretty well together. The House has been more partisan, but that's always been the history.
Right, but that Senate investigation has been going on for more than a year, too. And you would think that they would...
And they can subpoena documents,
yes.
phone records, they can subpoena bank records, they can follow the money wherever they can go. It is very broad authority. They don't have grand juries, but politically, for accountability, they can bring people in front of Congress if they want to make that political decision to do that, and then end up in the same place where they are in this report that Mueller did.
That's right, and the independent counsel statute explicitly provided for that. But there is a solution, there's a very easy solution, which is to elect politicians who don't commit crimes.
Well, that would be...
Then you won't need an independent counsel.
There you go.
Well, except in the
then
case...
newspapers would go out of business, so I'm not doing that.
Well, it's not only, but in this case we saw it wasn't just the question of Trump and the campaign, because other people got involved in all the other indictments, which all of you know about, that has been the subject of multiple news stories on it. But what I want to get back to for a moment is figuring out what we're going to know out of all these investigations. Is given that we have dueling investigations, Democrats in the House who are a little behind, even though under Republican control, House Intel and did do something. Do you think politically, whoever wants to jump in on this one, that the Senate Republicans will issue a report with conclusions before the House gets their work done?
Well, Senator Barr, who's chairman of the Intelligence Committee that Barr was just talking about, is already said publicly he thinks that their investigation has not turned up, this is right, any evidence of or convincing evidence of criminal conspiracy involving Russia. Senator Warner, his Democratic counterpart, is kind of hedged a little bit, saying, well, I'm not sure I see it 100% the same way.
But he's not at all near where Adam Schiff is.
But not where Adam Schiff
right.
is. And we have not seen, I would like to see what they think at this point, and it'd be interesting to see whether once Mueller report comes out, they decide to finally wrap up theirs and tell us their conclusion.
Well, isn't that the reason one just needs a report so you could tell the story?
Yeah.
If you want to know if there are contacts on WikiLeaks, here's who we talked to. Dancer, Prancer, Donner, and Blitzen. Here's what they told us.
I think those things will be in the report, don't you?
I do.
I would imagine a lot of that will be in.
I assume.
Roger Stone's records could be subpoenaed very easily, and
Right.
whoever else did. That's information that's very basic and easy to get that the committees should have already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know we subpoenaed emails and phone records and those type of things. So those are basic investigative.
Right, but in terms of the report itself, as opposed to running a collateral investigation, obtaining, you can, absolutely right, obtain all that stuff, pre-existing documents, you can obtain. The question is going to be, how do they redact the grand jury secrecy stuff? Because if you looked at the letters that were produced previously, where there were large redactions, they would say, and then witness X told us, redact, redact,
Right.
redact. And so if this report says, we undertook this investigation and we spoke to this person and this person said before the grand jury,
Yeah.
redact, redact, redact.
I hate that.
Then
I just hate that.
Then the redaction of the grand jury information, which is really oftentimes the heart of what tells the story, if that's done in an overly expansive way, then we may really not know from the redacted report what there is to conclude.
So I'm going to ask a few more questions, but in about 2 minutes, we're going to start taking questions. So people think of questions, sharp, great, provocative questions for this excellent panel. There's a microphone stationed over there, up in the bleachers on the left field and right field. So you have plenty of places to go, so start lining up. Think of good things, because you've got a powerhouse panel here. You have like more than 100 years of experience talking about investigations.
I've got 70 of them. They've got the rest.
No, but I'll tell you, this is this is a big deal that you have these people here. So let's really think of things to draw out what they know that could help us see where this story is going, because we know for the moment it's seemed parked at nothing, 73 words that everyone's been writing a lot about. So Peter, in this, do you think sometimes that, here's just something I'm curious about to explain and demystify what we do. Why in this story does it seem that the major print outlets have always been so far ahead of other outlets, TV, radio, in really putting together and following what's been going on in this investigation?
That's a good question. I mean, in our case, from the beginning, we put together a team of reporters who were just fabulous. I'm not part of it. I'm a White House reporter, which is a little different. And they have been, from day one, devoted to investigating not just the Russia story, but other stories that have come along as well, Michael Cohen and the inaugural fund and so forth. And they are just dedicated to, and I think the Post has done the same thing, and some of the other outlets have done the same thing. And you really, it's a resource thing as much as anything else. I mean, news organizations have been stripped bare in the last 10 years because of financials, and a lot of them don't have the same capacity that they once did to sort of really flood the zone, to use a phrase. And the Times has made a point of really doing that, so has the Post. And I think that the product is that we have managed to get as much information as we have.
Gentlemen up there, I see you have a question.
Yeah. Well, if it's not all sunshine for the president, it's not all sunshine for the media either, is it? I think Mr. Baker, in fact, wrote an article recently in the New York Times in which he suggested that it would be a reckoning not only for the president, the parties in Congress, but also for the media itself. Coming after the total failure of the media on the Iraq weapons of mass destruction story, if the hoax, which the media has raised great expectations about, proves to be equally fallacious, it's going to kind of deal a double death blow to the fake news or some people, the free speech, isn't it? This is really kind of putting the media on trial, given their past kind of sorry record and investigating hoaxes.
The question is, what is the question?
What is the reckoning that the media is going to do with itself if it turns out that you've gone well beyond investigating the president and assumed a kind of oppositional and promotional role in this hoax that falls flat?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. I'm glad you read the article. I do think it's a moment of reckoning for the media as well as for other institutions and players in Washington. And the one thing about the media is we're about as open as you can possibly be about our failures and our successes. We are out there every single day, and when we get it wrong, everybody can talk about it, and we talk about it ourselves. The media loves nothing more than a story about ourselves, believe me. And we have seen, even just in the last 2 weeks, lots of hand-wringing and discussion. Did we go too far? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? All that kind of thing. One thing I would add to that is that we should disaggregate a little bit this term, the media, because there is no such thing as the media. There's no such thing as a single organism that is all the same, because we are different. There are reporters, there are pundits, there are television, there's radio, there's blogs, and so forth. And I think a lot of people tend to overgeneralize about the media based on something they might have seen on Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow, who, with all respect to both of them, are commentators, not journalists. And they are, God bless them, as part of the political ecosphere, and it's good to have them. But to say that the media has done something because you see a partisan side going after things is different than what my colleagues have done, for instance, in reporting out the Mueller investigation. I would put our reporting up there and hold up there as still being, correct. Nobody's pointed out anything to me that we actually, in a significant way, had wrong. We reported on an investigation by a special prosecutor of the President of the United States on a serious topic. That's a serious journalistic goal of ours. We have tried to report on the facts as we can determine them without drawing conclusions beyond the facts. Did we go too far? Well, we can have that argument. But I think that in terms of the reporting that the Post has done, the Times has done, for the most part, holds up to this day and is unrefuted. The question, if Mueller, in these two sentence fragments that we have had from his report, has found that there's no crime, that doesn't mean that the facts that we have reported are incorrect. And people can judge these facts for themselves and decide, okay, I find this to be okay, and that people are making too much of this, or I find this to be objectionable. That's what our job is, to put it out there for people to come to that conclusion.
And the TV really has been, like when you talk about Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, I mean, when you got the initial report that Mueller was, did not find collusion and then was sort of neutral on obstruction, you could really see, it looked like election night 16, where, Rachel Maddow was in a meltdown. And that's, I think maybe that's what you're referring to. And I think I would hope when the report does come out that, for the small percent that are actually looking at it and factually going to evaluate and look at that, give them the respect of actually looking at the report and maybe not pay so much attention to a Rachel Maddow or others who are going to be cheering one way or the other.
Well, it's an important point, Peter, that you make, which is that there is a difference between people who are reporting facts and people who are offering opinions. I remember as a kid watching the CBS Evening News, and we would have the presentation of the news by Walter Cronkite, and then Eric Sevareid would come on at the end of the news and give his opinion. And we knew that it was an opinion. The problem in some respects is that there are many media outlets who have blurred that and are presenting opinions as if they're facts. And that's problematic.
And I would agree with that entirely. I think we have muddied that distinction. Unfortunately, we, the media, have done a bad job of that. In fact, my presence here on this panel is an example of how we shouldn't frankly do it. It used to be that I would refuse to go on television and be on a panel that included commentators or columnists or opinion people or partisans or politicians, because I didn't like the idea that we were being mixed together as if we were the same thing, because we're not. We have different roles. I've given up because, frankly, that's just, I can't, nobody else is listening to me on that. And I do go on panels now that include people who are opinionated people, and good for them. And all I can do is decide to stay within my lane, and my lane is not to be opinionated, it's to be as factual as possible and analytical. And I understand the distinction between analytical, which is what I spend a lot of time working on, and opinion can be gray and hard to distinguish at times. But my view is to try to stay on the fact-based analysis and let people like Michael or Barbara, who are smart and thoughtful and have been players, tell you what it means.
Yeah, for what it's worth, when I do this, and I'm on multiple panels, I see my role as an explainer or a decoder to just help explain what the other people are trying to talk about or argue about. Anyway, ma'am, you've got a question. And can we get other people? Come on. I want to see some more people asking really great questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kate Travis. I'm a first year at the college. I know that there's been some talk recently about Robert Mueller possibly being subpoenaed and speaking in front of Congress there. Do you believe that that will be an effective tool to uncover more about the investigation? What will he be able to say and what won't he be able to say if that does happen?
Thank you. I can't
think
wait
he
to
will.
see if they're going to make a prediction if he will be appearing before a congressional committee. Mike, what do you think?
I think he will be subpoenaed, and I think he will testify. I don't know whether there are aspects of what he may be asked as to which he can't give an answer because of grand jury or methods and sources or other things that are being evaluated presently by the Attorney General and Mueller in the redacting process. But I would expect that Congress's power of subpoena, especially if at that point he's a private citizen, will be pretty clear, and that he'll testify. Do you think?
I think he probably will be testifying too, and I think it will be helpful for people to understand the process they went through, and probably both sides will have to, if you kind of look at it and say, okay, I understand why he did that. I may not agree with the outcome, but I understand why they made these choices. And I think that's what you have to, having been at the Justice Department, having been in Congress, having worked with people on the outside who are subject to, you each have different roles. So understand what his role is and how he makes those decisions. And Congress's role is going to be to push in a different way than he might, and they can now make a decision on what they want to do.
And I think, Peter, you would probably write as much as you can about his thought processes. What was he thinking? What were the facts that were
Right.
presented to him, and how did he analyze them, and what is it that we can learn from that?
He is the least known person outside of people who know him, like you guys do, to the public, right? Because Ken Starr actually did from time to time talk, not very much. He was pretty restrained as well in public. Robert Mueller has been the most invisible public figure we've had in the last 2 years, and he's not explained himself in a public forum. And I think the public is, but I think the public would like to hear him talk about
Well,
it.
he's testified quite a bit when he was FBI director, so you can really see from his FBI testimony dealing with all kinds of complicated, issues, whether it's criminal or terrorism or things that were very, very contentious. He is sort of a just the facts ma'am type of person.
Ma'am.
Yeah, hi, we're just visiting from out of town and love jumping in and
What city?
listening to you guys.
Where are you from?
Los Angeles.
Welcome.
Thank you. This is kind of gutsy for me to even stand up and talk with you guys, but there's two pieces here. There's the political piece in terms of the Mueller report and what's revealed about obstruction and all the rest. And then there's this other piece about Russia's involvement. Where do we stand on that piece and going into the 2020 election? I'd really like to hear some thoughts about that.
That's a great question.
Russia specialist.
Well, but I did live in Moscow, but I think that's a great point because we have reduced this whole thing to collusion, no collusion, and in fact, because the president sees this whole conversation as a questioning his legitimacy, we are conflating the question of did Russia try to screw around with our election, and secondly, did the Trump campaign have anything to do with it, right? Even if you think the Trump campaign didn't have anything to do with it, or at least if they did, they were unwitting, actors in all this. The first part has been pretty well established by almost everybody who's seen it, as far as I can tell. And I think Robert Mueller's report will say that. I think that what Bill Barr makes clear in his memo, Robert Mueller does conclude that the Russians made a serious effort. He validates the conclusions that the intelligence committees, intelligence agencies have already made public. And in fact, he's made indictments to that effect. But you're right, because we are now focused so much on what it means for Trump and the presidency, we might have lost sight of that first part. And I think the president, unfortunately, encourages that because he doesn't, instead of simply saying, yes, I think that they did something wrong and I'm going to make sure they don't do it, but it had nothing to do with what I did, he simply conflates the two as if you say that they had something to do with the election, that you must be questioning his legitimacy, which you can do that separately. There's going to be separate questions.
Sir.
Hello, my name is David Carey, and I'm a fellow in the Advanced Leadership Initiative here at Harvard. I'm the former publisher of The New Yorker, so my politics are clear, so as I ask this question. There's maybe a fantasy a bit of people on the left that the full report comes out, there's lots of damning information and exchanges, and then just like so much that's happened in this administration, it's like, well, who cares? And it matters a great deal to the news organizations in New York and in Washington and the people in this room, but to the rest of the country, it's episode 948 of things that should matter and don't really. So what do you think are the chances that that plays out? The report comes out, it's not so favorable, but life just goes on as it is already today.
As life always does.
Or especially during this administration
Yes.
where no one knows what sticks, right? The rules get broken, there's so many things that are outside of the norms, and it doesn't seem to matter. And is this potentially just one more example of that?
Well, who wrote the piece this week in the New York Times on, whether it was, I'm from Virginia, so we have a few things going on with our governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. 2 women this week came forward, with some credible accusations about rape about our lieutenant governor. He's gutting it out. And I think the story was it's sort of the new model, just gutting it out, whether it was
disappeared. Story
really,
disappeared.
I think with Clinton, with the president, certainly in Virginia they're doing that. I think they noted others. There was a long list of those. I think most of them were men. I don't know if there are many women who've done these things. I don't know. So.
No, but I think that's exactly right. I think and I remember this from Clinton. Clinton teaches us that if you're willing to take the heat and you're willing to live with all the crap that's going to come and the whatever shame or whatever embarrassment and the damage to your family and all that stuff, and simply say I'm not going anywhere, it's awfully hard to push you out. And that's true of the governor of Virginia today and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general. And I think President Trump has shown that too. Just say I'm moving forward, and I'm not going to let you shame me or embarrass me into anything otherwise. And does that all add up? I don't know. I mean, ultimately, the accountability moment is going to be in the 2020 election, we presume, right? Assuming he runs for re-election, assuming that these issues are in some way litigated as part of that campaign, that may be an answer to that. But I think you're right. I think that the lesson for politicians, unfortunately, may be that,
Well, but I do think, I think Philippe Brains, who Hillary's press person,
He was
had an interesting
correct.
piece recently talking about how he kind of went at the investigation thing differently than it's sort of been the norm, saying that all those investigations hurt Republicans, and then, because they didn't impeach the president, lost some seats in the 98 election. But what he points out is Republicans did keep investigating through the 2000 election. They did win the election. Of course, that was a whole nother big, trauma. And then they kept the House until 2006. So he's arguing for investigations. Now, whether that'll work or not, because I think the president has turned a lot of these things on its head, and I think he learned lessons from Clinton, and now I think other politicians are learning maybe the wrong, lessons from him, and everyone's kind of doing this new gutted out thing, which is foreign to most of us. I mean, Nixon did leave, right?
Well,
no, in fact, after the Clinton thing, I went and talked to Howard Baker, whose law firm Barr was now at, and Fred Thompson, who had been key figures in the Nixon thing, and they saw that the lesson of Clinton was, had Nixon gutted it out, he might have actually still managed to stay in it. In the end, if he had dared them to actually go through with impeachment and conviction, he still might have actually survived. But up until that era, up until the Clinton era, the idea was, if you get caught doing something or accused of doing something credibly, you often just step down, right? Because there was sort of a...
Well, it also depends on the quality of the evidence. Some
Yeah.
of the Me Too stories, people stepped down because they...
Some did, yes.
It was there, and you just gave me a flashback, is that a dated word? Where the day that the Monica Lewinsky story broke, I remember talking to an editor saying, well, I'm sure, or we talked about how certain it must be that with that salacious material coming out that Clinton would resign, and we should prepare for that. And then, as the days went by, you realize he is not going to resign. And then as the years went by, he was able to survive, prevail, and go on in life, which is a lesson worth thinking about in this period. Sir, your question.
Bill Hauser, I'm a university graduate student. About 2 months ago, I heard the author, creator of the special counsel rules from 20 years back, saying that the best possible outcome for Trump would be if there were some really negative news, not wholly to one side awful, but clearly not everything is great either. And the rationale for that was, with all of the other investigations that are going on, that are out there, if there is nothing found wrong, that gives them impetus to continue and to press further ahead. So my question is, we haven't talked about everything else that the Mueller investigation has spawned. What becomes of those investigations, and have they lost steam, or are they indeed, as I wish I remember the gentleman's name, are they now going to gather additional steam?
Are you talking about the investigations
Southern
of the
District
Trump
of New York
Foundation
and
the
continue on from there.
inauguration committee, those?
Right, exactly.
Right.
I believe they go on, but...
So they continue on their own
Yeah.
track, and this is exactly what Mueller envisioned when new matters came to him that he thought were not those which were principal to his mandate or arose directly out of his mandate, like he kept Manafort. He would then farm it off to the U.S. Attorney's offices in whose geographies they had jurisdiction. And then those things proceed by those U.S. Attorney's offices as independent cases. Even though they were born out of Mueller's initial inquiry, they now stand free. And it's interesting that in my study group on Wednesday afternoons, which you're all invited to come to at 4:30, when we had Ken Starr there the other week, Judge Starr said, looking back, he wishes that he didn't take the Monica Lewinsky case. He wishes that he had given that to a U.S. Attorney's office to handle, not only because of the slings and arrows that he personally suffered for it, but that it was so principally disconnected to his primary financial crimes whitewater mandate. They found a way to tether them through Webb Hubble, I guess it was, who was one of the characters, and Vernon Jordan. They were able to construct a theory by which they could keep it. But he said, looking back, we should have let it go. We should have let it go to another U.S. Attorney's office. And Mueller, I guess, learning from Starr, said, I'm not going to fall prey to being a special counsel that's going to be here in perpetuity, which is one of the big second objections to the independent counsel statute, was that it created an incentive for prosecutors to keep investigating until they found something, so that it validated their existence. Mueller said, I want nothing to do with that. You, Southern District of New York, you, Central District of California, you, the U.S. Attorney's Office in District of Columbia, you're perfectly capable of handling this. You know,
I would say
be fruitful and multiply.
Let me rephrase that, because obviously the investigations continue on.
Yeah.
But maybe I should have said, even though they are not politicized, the Southern District of New York, Virginia, wherever else, they clearly have blinders on. But at the same time, there has to be some recognition that there is some level of politicism involved, and maybe there's a better way of phrasing the question.
No,
how much is that going to play into the...
I agree with you. As a matter of just practical politics.
Exactly.
The bar has now been raised for any other investigation, because the president's going to say, see, they just won't let me go. They're all just trying to persecute me. They didn't get me on this hoax thing. This is all stuff is all made up too. And to his people who are going to say, yeah, that's right, they're just going after him for political reasons, that's going to resonate. And I think that has made it much harder for any other investigation to really, unless they get some really damning and incontrovertible kind of evidence, I think it's making it not a matter of legal thing, because the lawyers will tell us differently, but as a matter of politics in the public sphere, it will make it harder for those things to gain traction, at least with the public. And I think the public will have already decided, their view of these things.
But I don't think it gives the prosecutors in those U.S. attorneys' offices added incentive to do anything that they wouldn't otherwise do with the facts and evidence that are before them. I would be disappointed if I thought that a prosecutor in another jurisdiction said, oh, darn, Mueller didn't get him, now it's up to me. That's not been my experience in the Justice Department.
Got it. But one isn't blinded that the Democratic Attorney General in New York is pursuing cases, and that's an elected official, but it's not unknown for politically elected attorney generals to pursue cases. Anyway, sir.
Thank you very much. Paul Sheard, I'm a senior fellow in the Kennedy School, Mossavar Rahmani Centre for Business and Government. I'm an economist, so I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. But a little bit of an extension of the previous question. As I understand it, a couple of other things are in play, the Horowitz Inspector General sort of investigation, and also something I haven't heard about for a while, the US attorney in Utah, John Huber, who was doing something that was commissioned by Jeff Sessions. Any sort of colour on how you see, in terms of what lies ahead, those investigations coming to light and what they, what impact they might have? And then a little bit further ahead, political question: do the panelists see this issue dragging on and, in some sense, almost hijacking the 2020 election?
I think on the Horowitz investigation, I think there will be more interesting information there. And I think that's something that the Republicans in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, has said he is going to pick up on. And I do think there is some need to really have an understanding of how this first came out and some of the misdeeds that were done by senior officials at the FBI. And I represented a lot of FBI agents. I worked with the FBI when I was at the Justice Department. And the career people, the rank and file, they have gotten a bad rap because of the actions of a few people. So I do think that needs to be sort of looked at, clarified a bit, so that they can turn the page and know that the actors who did things wrong that he's looking at, that they are now out, and that kind of thing doesn't happen again. What things can we put in place? Maybe there needs to be some kind of more, I know someone had told me about some need maybe to put somebody in charge of this, an insight, somebody who's a kind of a trusted FBI figure or not, some kind of nonpartisan person to look at it internally. I don't think we need another independent counsel. I think there are processes in place that can address that, but I do think that is another important aspect of this. And I think we should celebrate that there was no finding of collusion, and that the woman who pointed out, Russia is trying to interfere. Let's focus on those things and to make sure our system is safe, but let's celebrate that there wasn't anybody doing that, and not be disappointed that politically, they can't go get somebody now, because that's, you have seen some of that, and I think that's unfortunate.
You will be our last question from the audience, and then I'll have a final question. So you're on.
My name is Robert Rodriguez. I'm a graduate of the school. Many moons ago, I came here, inspired by the idea of speaking truth to power. And today we seem to, or at least I seem to think that there's a lot of questions about what is truth and what is power. We've heard today, it seems like we're more focused on tactics. It's almost like a house of cards, whatever works. We heard that Trump learned bad habits from Clinton, and now other presidents will learn bad habits from Trump's. So here's my question. Who are the heroes in this story? Who is speaking the truth? What are some positive lessons that students in this generation or future leaders could take? Is there anything positive in any of this?
I love your question. Thank you. You may be the last one. I might not have anything better than that, because that is.
Well, hopefully the American people
Barbara.
get to decide. So I think the American people always, step in and make a decision there. I do think the people who've had to do this investigation, Rod Rosenstein, Bob Mueller, and now Bill Barr, and I can tell you, knowing all three of them, I feel they have. When this is over, you will. I think if people give them a fair read of what went on there, that they will be some of the heroes, and then the American people get to decide.
At hero status, hero?
Well, I don't know if I think they had to deal with a tough hand that they all have been dealt with, but these are all people who are institutional people who I think have a reverence for the Justice Department. And when you're in there, your job is to do justice, not to represent a particular client, is to do justice. And I think that is what all three of them are doing right now as they work together. And I think people should be encouraged that the three of them are working together on this.
Mike?
Well, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that in some sense, irrespective of your political desires for a particular outcome, the system basically worked, except for Barr on March 24th, usurping Mueller's prerogatives. But basically, I think the system worked. You had an independent counsel, a special counsel, who went about his business quietly, without a political objective, it seemed to me, without speaking or leaking, and who made findings, indicted people that deserved to be indicted principally, and we should take, I think, comfort in that fact. There are always room for improvements, but I think that by and large the system worked, and there's some satisfaction to be taken from that.
I love your question, and I love it because, in fact, it's unanswerable. It's so hard, and it goes to the heart of our public life today. And I struggle with this a lot personally because I have a 14-year-old son, and I'm trying to raise him in this day and age. And what I tell him is basically that people in public life are not heroes, and don't make heroes out of the people you read in the newspapers or see on television just because you happen to agree with them on this or that, and recognize that they are human beings. And they have great strengths, and they have some flaws. And a lot of times they do things that are right, and you can cheer them on for this, but you should recognize that they will let you down, because people are people, and we're all human. And that he should evaluate them based on that, rather than to look for somebody to admire unquestionably. And I count journalism in that too. I count, for our question earlier, journalists should be subjected to the same standard in that regard. And that there are an awful lot of good people in politics, and there are an awful lot of good people in journalism, and in fact, most people I meet in politics, I actually think are in it for the right reasons. Doesn't mean they're always doing the right things, that they, sometimes slip because the system is such that it encourages it, and that therefore, just remember to evaluate people as three-dimensional rather than try to put them in a category of hero or villain, because it's unfortunately too simplest, and it doesn't work.
I think, and even if you disagree with the outcome, whatever it might be, when we see the report, we don't need to demonize, dehumanize, and attack the people who are involved in the process. And I know as, on my side of the aisle is, I had worked with Rod Rosenstein at the Justice Department, and I had also worked with Mueller and different people. And these are really tough calls sometimes. And sometimes you can look back and say, maybe I made a wrong call, like Ken Starr did. But that doesn't mean, that the level of assault that gets, attacked at them. So I'd say when you look at a lot of these people, you want people like this who really have that reverence for the rule of law, which I think those gentlemen do. And I think the men and women who are working at the FBI and the Justice Department, that's certainly what I saw when I was there. And that's why I think it's important that somebody does take a look at those few who really did, take this in a partisan turn in a way that was unfortunate and colored a lot of this.
I think my last hero was Mickey Mantle, 1956-57, and when Sandy Koufax didn't pitch on Yom Kippur. That was the last heroes that I've had.
Okay, so to wrap this up, and this is, and that was a very thoughtful thing. This is a little more nuts and bolts, which is just kind of checking off a box here. So Trump tweeted that no amount of disclosure will ever be enough for Democrats Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler. Schiff is the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the House, and Nadler is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. I think is that a question that is almost besides the point, because to the panel, as we close this out, there is going to be disclosure, because that's an institution. Is it an institutional norm for this to end up with disclosure of what the Mueller investigators have learned? Yes or no? Or your thoughts as we round out this session with our experts?
I think that the argument the president is making would have more traction had we already had the Mueller report come out yet. But he himself says he has no problem with the Mueller report coming out. 420 members of the House of Representatives say they have no problem with the report coming out. So he's making an argument, in effect, before it's ripe, I think. Mm-hmm. If the Mueller report came out and then yet the Democrats continue to press and press, then there'd be more of an argument to make at that point. Haven't we had enough? Don't you have enough? Take yes for an answer.
Yeah.
But at this point, we haven't seen the Mueller report, so it doesn't seem like, that's ripe yet.
It's an unripe
But if
tweet.
it's not what they want and hope, no, it won't be enough, and they'll want more. I think that's clear.
And Mike?
And Benghazi and other investigations, prove that to be the case. That when it's the ox that you want to gore, can never be gored enough, and when it's your ox that's being gored, it's always too much. So that's just the way it is.
And with that, we're concluding this edition of What's Going to Happen Next. Stay tuned. We don't know where this is going, except to know it's going someplace. And I say this with all seriousness, that this is a historic moment we're in as we look at this next chapter in the Trump presidency. I want to thank Peter Baker and Barbara Comstock and Mike Zeldin for joining us here at the Institute of Politics Forum tonight. And I want to thank the audience for coming, listening, and asking us some questions. That's it tonight. And thanks so much.